two neighbors had a bitter dispute. They were arguing endlessly and passionately, and neither one of them could be persuaded to see things from the other's point of view. So they went to see the rabbi. And the first disputant laid out his case before the wise rabbi, and the rabbi said, "You're right." And then the second disputant laid his case out before the rabbi, and the rabbi said, "You're right." And then the rabbi's wife, who was standing next to him, said, "What are you talking about? How can they both be right?" To which the rabbi said, "You're also right." But actually, according to the Jewish tradition, the rabbi's wife was wrong. And let me just be clear, I'm talking about the rabbi's wife in that joke, not my wife, who is never wrong. Because as our tradition teaches, it is actually possible for both sides to be right. Or at the very least, it is certainly possible for both sides to reach a compromise. If you've ever been to a soccer game in Israel, or as they call it, kadur-regel, football, then you might know that if the score is even at the end of the game, they don't call it a tie or a draw. They use the word teku. And one of the many amazing things about Israel is that so many words in the modern Hebrew lexicon can trace their roots directly back to the Talmud, and teku is one of those words. The Talmud is an anthology of thousands of rabbinic debates on just about every topic imaginable, from ritual and law to theology, philosophy, and ethics. And usually, the view of one rabbi in those debates takes precedence over the view of his opponent. For example, in the vast majority of cases, we side with Hillel and not his intellectual sparring partner, Shammai. But in just over 300 cases in the Talmud, 319 cases to be precise, the debate comes to a standstill. And when the rabbis are faced with two equally balanced sides of an argument, and there is no possible way to definitively determine which side is correct, they throw up their hands and they declare, teku. And teku is an abbreviated form of the Aramaic word tekum, which means let it stand. But it's also an acronym for the four Hebrew letters Taf, Yud, Kuf, and Vav, representing the four words Tishbi, Yitaretz, Kushiotu, Ba'ayot. At the end of days, Eliyahu HaTishbi, Elijah the Tishbite, will come to resolve all disputes and difficulties. So in other words, when the Israeli soccer teams Beitar Yerushalayim and Hapoel Tel Aviv come to a tie, and we say teku, what we're really saying is that when Elijah comes to announce the arrival of the Mashiach, then he'll tell us who really won that soccer match. But until then, we let it stand. And why am I telling you all this morning? Not only because this morning's Haftarah referenced Elijah, but because on Wednesday night at the Seder, we will all be participating in the most famous example of teku, letting an open question stand until Elijah comes. As we all know, we drink 4 cups of wine each year at the Seder, one corresponding to each of the 4 biblical expressions of redemption mentioned in the book of Exodus. Vehotzeti, vehitzalti, vega'alti, velakachti. I will bring you out, I will rescue you, I will save you, and I will take you. But the truth is, there is a 5th expression of redemption mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy. V'yotzienu Adonai mimitzrayim, and God brought us out of Egypt. And so, in the Talmud, Rabbi Tarfon suggests that we should actually drink 5 cups of wine at the Seder, and not 4. And there's a very well-known dispute among the medieval rabbis about whether we should drink 4 or 5 cups of wine at the Seder. Rashi says unequivocally that we should only drink 4 cups. Rambam, Maimonides, holds that there could be a 5th cup, but it's optional to drink it, not obligatory. And the Ravad, who lived in France in the 12th century, teaches that the 5th cup actually is obligatory. And so there's a controversy, a very famous controversy over this 5th cup. Rashi said we shouldn't drink it, Rambam said that we could drink it, and the Ravad said that we must drink it. So what happened? We said teku, and a compromise position was developed. We pour a fifth cup of wine out of respect for Maimonides and the Ravad, but we don't drink that fifth cup of wine out of respect for Rashi. And that is how the fifth cup, Kos Eliyahu, the cup of Elijah, came to be. We leave a cup of wine out for Eliyahu Hanavi at the Seder every year because we hope that when Elijah comes, he will ultimately settle the debate and tell us definitively whether we are supposed to drink 4 cups of wine or 5 cups of wine at the Seder. But until Elijah comes, we compromise because that's what Jews do. Jews have been compromising and finding middle ground positions for thousands of years. And of course, what I'm really speaking about this morning, the sermon behind the sermon, is Israel. Israel just lived through one of the most difficult and tumultuous weeks in its history. And just to give you some context, if you've been following the news, or if you haven't been following the news, for the past several weeks and months, Prime Minister Netanyahu's far right-wing coalition has been proposing judicial reform legislation that a majority of the country opposes. And there is real and deep concern among not just American Jews, but among the majority of Israelis that these proposed reforms would shift the balance of power so radically from the courts to the government that it would mean the end of checks and balances in Israel, and ultimately it could signal the end of Israeli democracy. And that's not being hyperbolic. That's not being overly dramatic. Over 60% of Israelis feel this way. Tens of thousands of people have been protesting in the streets every Saturday night for months. And last Sunday, when Prime Minister Netanyahu fired his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, for speaking out against the proposed judicial reforms, the entire country came to a standstill. On Monday, there were massive protest strikes in every sector of the Israeli economy. Hospitals all over the country were closed. Universities didn't open their doors. All flights out of Ben Gurion Airport were grounded. And even McDonald's closed all of their locations in Israel on Monday. And thankfully, and to his credit, after these massive protests and strikes on Monday, Netanyahu did finally agree to postpone pushing through the legislation, at least until after Pesach. And I, for one, am very glad that everyone on both sides of the political spectrum will be sitting down at a Seder table this coming week. Because that means that every Jewish member of the Knesset will see that fifth cup of wine on the table, the cup of Elijah. And they will be reminded of the fact that when Elijah comes, maybe he will be able to successfully solve the problem of judicial reform in Israel. But we don't have the luxury to wait for the arrival of the Mashiach to solve this problem. We need to solve it now, because the country is literally on the brink of tearing itself apart. So until the Mashiach comes, Israel has no choice but to find the political equivalent of putting that fifth cup of wine out on the table, the cup of Elijah, the cup of compromise. I don't have an answer. I can't tell you what Israel's judicial reform should be. But what I can tell you is that a country that I love deeply is in a true moment of crisis. And if both sides can't figure out how to talk to each other, how to engage in meaningful dialogue, how to compromise, then I can assure you that Israel is headed down a road that nobody wants to see it go down. When will the prophet Elijah arrive? No one knows for sure. But we read in this morning's Haftarah, the Haftarah for Shabbat HaGadol, that Elijah will only come when the hearts of parents are turned to their children and the hearts of children are turned to their parents. Lev avot al banim velev banim al avotam. In other words, when people soften their hearts, when they listen to one another, when they learn what it means to speak to each other, then and only then will Elijah's presence truly be felt. On that day, all disputes will be reconciled and all difficulties will be resolved. May that day come very soon for our brothers and sisters in Israel and for all of us. And let us say, Amen. We rise for the Chatzi Kaddish on page 428, followed by the Musaf Amidah on page 430.
Yitgadal v'yitgadash Rabbi v'yamadi v'akirtei v'yamlik malchutei b'chayechonu v'yamechonu v'chayedocho Beit Yisrael v'agalav izman kariv imru Amen. Yeshmei Rabbi.